I was reading a story that reminded me of an event from over 20 years ago. In the second half of 1998, I had taken a job as a security guard at a plant that made locks. Being a kid, I usually worked one of 3 shifts, 4 p.m. to 12 a.m., 7:30 p.m. to 3:30 a.m., or 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. The 7:30 to 3:30 shift was for extra coverage, so there were always 2 of us there for 7:30 to midnight. It was a routine, boring job for the most part. We did our rounds, logged anything out of the ordinary, and watched a tiny monitor displaying the CCTV feed. Things went by in an almost painfully normal manner for 6 months. I worked, saved, bought a car, and planned a move. By late March of 1999, I served my notice and prepared to head cross-country. A new hire was brought in to fill my spot, a soft-spoken man named Calvin. As part of his training, Calvin spent some time working at all hours. At night, he was a shadow, working with myself and the other night guard, getting a feel for the plant's nocturnal routines. Most nights he worked with myself and Amira, a female guard who was around my age. I was 18 at the time. Calvin, who was about a decade older, was quiet and polite, though something seemed to be missing. There's a spark that genuinely nice people seem to have, and he didn't possess it. Whenever he went on rounds with me, he'd ask questions about the job and make small talk. I noticed that he was a little odd, laughing at odd times and changing his tone mid-sentence. At the time, I chalked it up to him being awkward. That wouldn't last. One night, near the end of his first week, he went on rounds with Amira. When they returned to the office, I knew something was wrong. Normally talkative, she would barely say a word. Not sure what had occurred. I waited until Calvin had gone to the restroom to ask. During their trip, everything had been normal until they reached the brass mill, a portion of the plant that shut down at 6 p.m. There were usually no employees there after that time and no lights. They were making their way to a checkpoint on a landing atop a flight of stairs when the mood shifted. She told me that she turned around only to find that he was right on her. Startled, she backed against the grating at the end of the landing and he leaned in towards her, his face nearly touching hers. He flirted in a low voice, and when she mentioned his wedding band, he said it would be over soon. From then on, I did the rounds, taking Calvin with me each time. The night ended without further incident, and I left a note for our supervisor detailing what had occurred. The next night came and went with no Calvin. I did the rounds while Amira stayed in the locked office. Same thing the night after. Then on my second-to-last shift, I come in to find her freaking out. She found out why Calvin hadn't been at work. He had been arrested for murdering his wife. She had been dismembered and burned, parts of her body placed in a pond less than a mile from where we worked. That night and the next, Amira called the jail just to make sure that they were still holding him. Based on the time frame, he had killed his wife months before he started the job. This happened to me when I was 11 years old. I'm a female for reference, and for a very long time I felt so ashamed and even guilty of the whole situation. My mother and her former partner invited friends to our apartment from time to time. They'd sit together, had some drinks, listening to music, and had a good funny time. Many of these friends also had children, so I was friends with them. When the adults had their party time, we had our pajama party. I was usually the oldest of all the kids. I remember having a good relationship with all the adults. I had no good relationship to my mother. Even my relationship to her partner was better, so to me it was really special. They respected me, listened to me. The women talked to me about women's things, and I always felt like I was taken seriously. Sometimes when we as a group of kids wanted to play catch me or hide and seek, they took their time to do so. My mother never played with me, ever. There was one couple that separated because of cheating. I overheard some drama the adults were talking about. I was friends with the daughter, since she was in my age range. My mother and her partner were still friends with the mother and the father, despite their issues. One evening, the father, Peter, visited us. Peter sat together with my mother and her partner, chat a little until they got drunk. No other kids, but maybe other adults I might not remember. At some point, I don't know how we got there, I ended up playing hide and seek with them. Peter was so friendly and chatty, he encouraged me to learn an instrument, and I opened up to him. Sometimes I feel so ashamed and sick because of my naivety. It was getting late. I had to go to bed. My mother was tired, her partner was tired, and Peter decided to sleep in our living room on the couch. Nothing unusual. Then I woke up in the middle of the night because someone was constantly talking to me. Peter sneaked into my bed under my blanket and talked quietly while stroking my hair. He said he would get me a keyboard so I could learn playing it. I was horrified. I knew that it was not okay, but I was too afraid to call my mother or her partner. I knew that they were drunk too, and I thought this was my fault alone. I said to Peter that he has to leave my bed in my room. I begged him to leave me alone. I convinced him to leave, and he went back to the living room. I thought it was done, but nope. Later, I woke up again when I felt his hand under my blanket, again. I stood up, told him to leave. "Please stop this, let me sleep," I said. It was already early in the morning. The sun was rising again. I kept friendly, and somehow I made Peter leave my room again. This time I took the key from our bathroom that fits into every lock and locked my room from the inside to keep him away. He tried again to get in, but now I was safe. But not safe for my own guilt. I wanted to talk about this with my mother, but I couldn't. Nowadays, I would shake my younger self to open up about this. It's not okay. This was not my fault. I was still a little girl. But back then, I couldn't. I just felt sick to my stomach. Nothing serious happened. He didn't hurt me physically, so I believed it wouldn't make sense to talk about it. I now know there was no reason for guilt and shame. It's not easy to explain this feeling. I could be because of all the warnings I heard as a little girl. Don't go with foreign men. Don't take their chocolate. Run away immediately. I really thought it was all my fault because I was too nice to Peter. Peter never visited us again, and I also haven't seen him when I visited his daughter. Years later, when I was a teenager, I told my mother about that night, and she got furious. She said I should have told her. She was so angry with Peter, but then, my mother is not a very reasonable woman. A few years back, when she discovered Facebook, she became friends with him again. I couldn't believe it. "Don't you remember what I told you about him?" I asked her, but she didn't seem to care. I hope so much his daughter was always safe and secure. I've recently moved into a new flat about 3 weeks ago, and I'm sharing it with my sister. The only person we know properly is a single mom who lives in the apartment next door to us. Ever since we moved in, she's been giving us advice and helping us out with things. We don't know anyone else properly yet. From what we've seen of our other neighbors, they're mostly couples in their 30s and 40s, or older guys who live alone. We're probably the youngest ones here. We're both females. I'm 18 and my sister is only 16. Today I was out with friends, and then later on I went to the gym. After this I went to get my sister so we could go out for some food. We got in around 10 p.m. Me and my sister got into our pajamas and were just sitting around watching TV when our buzzer rang. I jumped up to answer it, and it turned out to be our neighbor, the single mom. I asked her what was up, and she said that our dad's asking for us downstairs. Straight away my stomach dropped, and I immediately asked her if she's sure he said he was our dad. The reason I asked her was just to make sure that's what she actually said. But she replied that yeah, he said he was our dad and was asking for us. The neighbor asked me if she could let him up to our flat, but I told her no. I wanted to shout out to my sister, but I didn't want to worry her right away. I asked the neighbor to not let him come up yet, and I heard her repeat this to him. I couldn't hear anything for a few moments after this, and I started to get really worried. At this point, my sister comes up to me and asks who it is. I just called out to my neighbor a few times. It must have only been about 5 minutes, but It honestly felt like ages when she didn't reply. I was actually about to tell my sister to call 000 because I was starting to panic and didn't know what to do. Then she came back on and told me that he was gone. She then came up to our flat and explained what went down. She said that she was walking back to her flat after finishing work and saw a man by the buzzers. At first she assumed that he was just someone who lived there, until he noticed her walking up. He asked for us by name and if she could let him up to our flat. She asked him who he was, and he told her that he was our dad. Now obviously she buzzed us and told us first, as our neighbor doesn't know us that well, so she doesn't know what our dad looks like. She said that because we were young, she didn't want to buzz in a strange man up to our flat. She said that her motherly instincts kicked in when she heard my hesitation to let him up to the flat. Apparently after he heard me say that, he got really pushy with her and started trying to move her out of the way. He kept on saying to her, "It's okay, I'm their dad. Let me in, I'm not going to do anything." She started arguing with him and asking him to tell her his name, but he refused to tell her. She told him that if she didn't feel comfortable letting him in, there's no way he's getting in. His reaction was to call her terrible names and then to get into a car and drive away. Now this is the reason why I hesitated. We haven't spoken to our dad since I was 16. We even considered getting a restraining order from him at one point. He's not our biological father, but we were legally adopted by him when I was 9. He was both emotionally and physically abusive to our mom and had started to do the same to me. It got to the point where we had to leave him in the middle of the night. After this, he became very controlling and would secretly follow us and record me and my sister. He has a criminal record as well, and I believe he was convicted of manslaughter in the 80s. I have no idea of the backstory behind that, and I honestly don't want to know. Like I said, we haven't heard from him since, so as soon as I heard her say the word dad, I almost had a panic attack. I asked her to describe him, and she said that because it was dark out, she couldn't really see him. We ended up staying with her because me and my sister were really shaken up. I don't know whether to call the police or not. I don't know if it's him or not, as it could easily have been someone else. I appreciate any advice. This might not seem too bad compared to many others, but a man has followed me around the store 5 times now. For background, I can only really go to the store late at night at around 9 or 10 due to my job. I know it isn't safe, but I always carry a taser or pepper spray on me for things just like this. I'm also only 5 feet tall and pretty petite. He's probably at least 6 feet tall and over half my size. It started sometime last year. A man walked up to me while I was in the self-checkout and started asking me typical questions, like asking if I had a boyfriend, telling me he noticed me walking around and needed to tell me I was pretty, things like that. I lied and said I had a boyfriend just for my own safety and took the compliment. I didn't think anything weird of it. Until it happened again and again. Every time he used the same exact script in the same exact order and always finds me in very closed-off spaces. The first 3 times he never even had anything in his hands to buy. The second time I was sitting on the floor of the makeup aisle, totally vulnerable. He said the same thing as the first time, and I politely told him I still do have a boyfriend, but thank you. That was that. I just thought of it as a coincidence. The third time it happened, I was in the very corner of the store by the vegetables with nobody near me. He says the same exact thing as the first 2 times, so I finally had to tell him. You've come up to me 3 times now. Every single time you've talked to me, I've told you no. Listen, I need you to leave me alone. Don't come up to me again. The 4th time it happened, we passed each other and he realized it was me, so he circled around and followed me into the medicine aisle and pretended to look at the bottles. Every time I took a step to the side, he would too. At that point, as soon as I saw him, I called up a friend so I would have somebody that could hear what was happening and to try to scare him off. I turned the corner and I could hear him calling out for me, so I started walking faster. Believe it or not, I ended up running into a police officer in uniform, and even though he was busy and I felt bad for interrupting, I asked him for help. The officer walked me to the self-checkout when the man actually had the nerve to pick the counter right next to me. The officer walked me out to my car and I could see the guy watching me in the parking lot. This last interaction just happened a couple of minutes ago. I was looking for something for dinner and walked out of the frozen food across to the makeup. Guess who walked past me at the same time? We crossed paths and I kept walking and checked over my shoulder. He was still watching me. I freaked out and hid in the makeup aisle and poked my head out, and sure enough, he was looking up and down the aisles to see where I went. I texted my mom and a friend solely because I didn't know what to do. When I saw him turn, I went to find a manager, but I could hear his keys following me. The manager walked me to check out, and once again, he picked the counter next to mine. The manager walked me out and he trailed behind me and watched me get into my car. I did a couple of circles to make sure nobody was following me and drove home. Am I being stupid and overreacting? It's happened 5 times now. After the 3rd time it happened, I reported him to a different manager and he told me if he's ever in the store again, he'll be removed and banned. But that one wasn't here tonight. Where do I go from here? The officer that helped me even told me that unfortunately he couldn't do more than walk me out. I know I shouldn't go so late, but it's the only time that I can. This story happened slightly over 20 years ago, back when I was 16. During this time, I lived with my mom and stepdad in a remote area 70 miles west of Las Vegas, Nevada. I had gone out to visit my friends, being allowed to drive myself for the first time ever. Had a lovely time watching a movie and getting food together until it was time for me to head home. The curfew I was given was 10 p.m. with the caveat that if I was running late for any reason, to find a payphone and call. The night wrapped around me in my old 71 Chevy pickup, as there were no street lights or houses for most of my way home. As I pulled up to the first of 2 stop signs, I could see an older sedan. Old cars are still pretty common in that area, stopped with its hazards on. I pulled up behind it and waited as a man, 30 to 40, started walking towards me from the driver's side. Even at this point, I didn't have any alarm bells going off. Being in the middle of the Mojave Desert, providing assistance to stranded people was common. People rapidly get into severe problems there by not having enough water when a vehicle breaks down, or not realizing that it's a freaking desert and people die wandering delirious away from the highway trying to find help. Anyhow, I rolled down my window, and as he came abreast of my door, I could smell the liquor on him. I could see another man in the passenger seat. As this was before anyone I knew had cell phones and the nearest payphone was a good 10 minutes drive ahead, I didn't have a way to call the cops on a drunk driver immediately. The man explained that his car stalled and asked if I could help them out. I asked if his car was a stick shift, which it was, so I asked if he was familiar with push starting it. He said yes. So I agreed to, as gently as I could, push their car with my truck while they turned the engine over. For anyone that isn't familiar, this is a way to start a manual car that is having battery or starter issues, specifically to get it somewhere to work on it. I knew my truck would be fine, and I didn't feel like it would be wise to get out and to try to push their car physically. Push starting the car worked without a hitch, but here's where things go south. They get back out and thank me, then invite me to hang out and have some fun with them. I decline. They pull off to the side of the road and I continue on my way, only for them to start following me. So here I am. It's 9:50, I'm running late because I stopped to help them. Admittedly, I haven't given myself much leeway from leaving my friends. These drunk, creeper old guys have started to follow me on a road without any man-made light except for car headlights, and I'm at least 10 minutes from a payphone. I think to myself, maybe I'm being paranoid, so I turn down a road that I know gave me a couple of turnoffs to either head back to town or loop around to the gas station with a payphone. The car follows behind me. I'm thinking, oh God. I take another turn that only leads to a couple of houses at the end of the road, and they turn behind me. I take another turn to loop around back to the gas station, and they follow again, so at least I know that they are following me and not just heading home. At this, my heart is pounding. I decided to try something to lose them. I pull to the side of the road. I see them pull up behind me. I wait as the driver gets out of the car and begins walking towards me. His companion also gets out and starts walking towards me. I wait until they almost get to the tailgate, then floor it. My wheels dig into the rocks, and dirt is flying like a cloud behind me. With the leadway, I head towards the gas station. The gas station is deserted, but the payphone is showered in the light from the gas pumps. I call home and explain what had happened and why I was running late. My stepdad asked if the gas station worker could be seen, and I let him know that I couldn't see him behind the counter. He was probably in the back. I wasn't in trouble, but I was asked to hurry home. To begin, this started when I was 14. I'm a female. I'm 21 now. I just transferred to a new high school in the middle of the school year as a freshman with my twin sister. I was enrolled into a Spanish 2 class where I met Tony, and that's where the obsession began. But when I started my class and I met Tony, I instantly thought he was attractive. He was tall, brown hair, and beautiful eyes for a guy, and was also a year my senior. But I did notice he was extremely shy and kind of awkward, but I made up excuses to talk to him, asking him about the homework and other meaningless small talk. He took to me and asked if I wanted to walk around during lunch and talk, and I happily agreed. He was obviously not very confident and didn't know how to initiate conversations, so I did most of the talking, even went as far as asking him for his phone number. After a few days of texting and talking, I can tell he doesn't have any friends and he is kind of negative and has a pessimistic view towards life. It was rather draining and disappointing. Things he would say were kind of upsetting, or I guess just unusual for me. He would text me fantasizing about being a superhero, kind of like roleplay, in which I was the damsel in distress and he was my savior, and text me somewhat similar to those choose-your-own-adventure, always ending in the damsel and the hero kissing and being together. He had an obsession with Ghostface from the Scream movies. Overall, he was a nice guy, but different from what I was expecting or attracted to. Time passes, Valentine's Day is coming up. We're talking practically every day, so he asked me to be his Valentine. I agree, somewhat reluctantly. So it's Valentine's Day. He walks up to me and gives me a pack of Hershey's Kisses and some Twizzlers. I don't like Twizzlers, so I handed them back to him, gave him a kiss on the cheek, and went to my class. Yes, I know that was kind of rude, but I was honestly losing interest in him at that point, and I told him before I didn't like red vines or any candy like that. During the day, I received more gifts, flowers, and candy from other friends, and I see Tony, and I can tell he's extremely upset by this, but he doesn't say anything. He texts me later in the day saying how stupid he felt and how he was outdone by everybody else. I didn't respond. Over the next few weeks, I gradually talked to him less and less. Class is awkward, and I can tell he wants to say something to me but never does. I later learned from my twin sister that he asks her every single day about me, if I'm talking to someone else, if I like him, how to win me over, confiding in her that he has never even talked to a girl before, and at first I think it's sweet. But I still no longer had a romantic interest in him. We would talk at school sometimes. He would bring me homemade cookies, walk me to the train station, still text and try to call me in the evenings after school. But I was talking to someone new who eventually became my boyfriend for the rest of high school. His name was Brandon. When I started dating Brandon, I knew that Tony was absolutely devastated. He then started telling people around school that I was his first kiss. I was confused because I didn't know a kiss on the cheek counted as a first kiss, but to each their own. It was somewhat upsetting because people were getting the impression that we dated or that I played him, which was not the case at all. I would still talk to Tony as a friend. He was in the same grade and classes as my new boyfriend, and he would always tell me how he thought Brandon didn't like him and that he felt like Brandon knew about us. I told Tony there was nothing to know about us because we weren't anything but friends, and Brandon was totally chill, a non-confrontational stoner type, not in his nature to stir up drama over nothing, and definitely not the jealous type. The school year was coming to an end, and Tony comes running up to me after the last day of school and hands me this, and I kid you not, a 60 or 70-page notebook, explaining all the ways he's in love with me and how everybody at the school thinks poorly of me and how he can treat me better, blah blah blah. I read it once, show my twin, and she tells me how weird and uncomfortable it makes her. We both agree on that. I stash it away and don't speak of it to anybody. I act like nothing happened, and I still talk to him as a friend occasionally. I worked a lot in high school in my free time and spent a lot of time with my boyfriend and friends and didn't think much about Tony. Time goes on, we eventually stop talking. I see him around school and he never really is with anybody else. He's usually always alone, which I don't find strange anymore considering how awkward and quiet he can be. Fast forward another year, I'm a junior. Tony and Brandon are both seniors getting ready to graduate. Tony texts me out of the blue one day and tells me he has written a book and it would mean the world to him if I could be the first to read it and give him feedback. And being the person I am, I agree. So he comes up to me at school the next day and hands me this fat notebook and tells me to take my time reading it and to give him honest feedback when I was finished. I read this story in 4 class periods. It was around 300 pages long. Anyway, the story takes place in a Game of Thrones era and setting. The 3 main characters are Eric, Tony, Alva, me, and Isaac, Brandon. For the sake of confusion, I'll be referring to the characters by our names. And the only reason I know the characters were us and not fictional was simply by the way he had described them, literally identical to our physical appearances. To continue, Tony was the son of the king or whatever, the rest of us mere peasants. But Tony was always in love with me, but I was with Brandon. It was the annual time where our kingdom would go to battle with another for honor and glory, gladiator style. Tony thought it would be a wonderful time to prove himself and volunteered. The night before our kingdom traveled to where the battle would take place, my character went to Tony in the middle of the night to express her love and fear, and they ended up sleeping together. Very graphically, mind you. It was truly disturbing. The next day, after they had arrived at the place of battle, my character went to his room again, where the same graphic encounter occurred again, and during, Brandon came looking for my character in which we were caught. My character told Tony I didn't really love him and ran after Brandon to apologize for being a harlot. Tony was devastated and ultimately let his opponent end his life in battle because he couldn't handle the loss of the love of his life. Our kingdom goes back home, and in the middle of the night, Brandon sneaks through the window and ends my life, slits my throat, the end. As you can imagine, I was absolutely horrified and creeped out. I threw the book away and never told Tony what I thought about it. He must have known because he never asked for it back. Tony and Brandon both graduate. Life goes on. Tony didn't try to reach out to me for a few years until I was around 20. He messaged me on Instagram in the middle of the night. "Show me your feet. Submit to Daddy. I always look at your feet at school and would fantasize about them," along with links to a few foot websites. I promptly blocked him. The next day he messaged me on another account, a foot in bondage account he ran. He asked me why I blocked him. I blocked him again. Earlier last year on my new account, he messaged me basically calling me all sorts of names and how he wishes I would die, and how he hated everyone we went to school with and hoped they all would die, and how he fantasized on how he would end my life for all the pain I caused him. I genuinely was afraid, but didn't know how to handle the situation. Was it really a threat? I don't know. I later learned that he worked at a diner down the street from my apartment that I avoided at all costs. I've since moved and I haven't heard from Tony since, but multiple girls I went to high school with told me he was obsessed with me and would constantly talk about them to me, and how he would message them the same disgusting things while he was on a drunken stupor. This happened a few hours ago. I don't even know why I'm posting this, maybe because I only started to properly think about it just now and can't stop thinking about something that he had said to me. I wasn't even paying much attention to it at the moment. All I wanted was for him to finally be on his way and to let us do the same. I had just hopped on a bus to go to a local fast food chain with my best friend. When we got to the bus, we noticed 2 empty seats and decided to sit there, since we were tired and didn't really want to stand up for the whole ride. They were facing 2 other seats, though, and one of the seats was taken by an older man. He looked pretty rough and reeked of alcohol. I thought nothing of it, since he wasn't bothering us or anything, and then he asked me something, and the conversation goes as follows. "Does this bus take me to the shopping center?" "Yeah, just get off at the last stop." "Okay." Then he mumbled something to himself. "Could you tell me what time it is?" "It's 4:05 p.m. "Okay, thanks." I thought that it would be the end of it. I've had other people ask me similar things in the past. Again, nothing weird about it. He seemed pretty drunk, perhaps high on something else too, though I couldn't tell that much. Then he started going on about not having daughters and that he's a single man and that he'd love to find himself a nice lady. I wished him luck with that and told him that he'd eventually find one. He said his name was Pat and that he was 49 years old. He seemed to be pretty stunned when he found out my age. He asked if I had a boyfriend and I said yes. He replied with an "oh" and then went on. He kept muttering and muttering, saying how he wants to have friends and how lonely he is. 50% of the time I couldn't even make out what he was saying because it was just constant muttering. We got off the bus and I figured he'd just be on his way. He instead followed us and kept asking where the tram stop was, as he wasn't local. Since it was going to be on our way anyways, I figured we'd just walk him towards it and that would be the end of it. When we started getting closer to it, he told us that he actually knows where it is, that he's been here quite a bit actually. He kept going on about wanting friends again and kept telling me what a lovely lady I am and that he'd love to be my friend and asked me if I would visit him. "You look so much like my previous girlfriend when I was 27. I started to get uncomfortable, but we were almost at the fast food chain and I thought that would finally be it. I did feel bad for him though, because obviously he didn't seem to be in the best situation. Then, when we were almost there, he muttered to himself, or perhaps me again. I couldn't really tell at this point. "I've been in prison for 20 years, kept in isolation for so long. Oh, I've been so lonely." At that moment, I was too stressed out to actually listen to what he was saying. All I wanted was for him to leave. He kept following us around the fast food chain, interrupting me, and at one point I got so frustrated that I slapped my forehead. I finally got my order, and now we just kept waiting for my friend to get hers. He kept ignoring my best friend the entire time, like she wasn't even there. He seemed so fixated on me. I kept telling him multiple times that we were in a hurry and that we'd have to go. Finally, he told me his address and kept pressuring me to write it down. I did, just so he'd leave faster. Turns out that he actually lived in the city, but in a nursing home since he was sick or something. He also went on about not having a cell phone or anything, which is why he was so eager for me to write his address down. "Ask them for Pat. You're there, so I'll know I have visitors. You know, you're the first female I've talked to in 20 years. It feels so nice talking to you. I really want to be friends. Will you be my friend?" "Sure, we can be friends. Perhaps I'll visit sometime. We're in a hurry though, so I'll see you around." 20 years since I've seen or talked to a female. It's so awful. Such loneliness. It felt as if though he wasn't even paying attention to what I was saying or just didn't care. But then he finally did seem to leave, for a bit. My best friend looked at the door and said in disbelief that he wasn't even gone, that he was still standing behind the door. Then he re-entered the fast food chain and walked up to me again. He took out his cigarettes and showed it to me, telling me how he'd like to share them with someone and asked if I wanted some. I refused and told him that we really needed to go, because at this point I was getting a bit angry. He then smirked at me and kept touching his pocket. I also got some vodka here, in my pocket." And then he just kept oddly smiling at me and looking at me in the eyes. My best friend finally got her order too. An employee noticed the situation and stepped in, lightly pushing him away and asking him if he could leave already. The employee asked us if we needed security, but I told him it was fine for now since he seemed to be leaving again. When Pat walked out the door, we bolted out of the other exit. There were 2 doors and didn't see him again. When I got home, I decided to Google the address out of curiosity. Apparently it's a facility for people with special psych needs. That's when I remembered what he had said. That was the first female he's talked to in 20 years, and that he's been in prison for over 20. Maybe I shouldn't have been so nice, but I did feel bad for him at the moment. I didn't want to be stuck up and just tell him to buzz off, even though my best friend told me that's what I should have done from the start. I don't do well in such situations, and it was just overall really uncomfortable. Pat, I hope you'll find your way. And if you really were in prison, I hope you're a different person now and have moved forward.
Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit at rLet'sReadOfficial and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And join my Discord to interact with me and other listeners directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all these stories in long compilations, forms, and save huge on data. Located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the bio. Thank you so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.